I'm driving north to the dying fields of Coram with BBC correspondent Mike Wooldridge, who made this journey with Dad over 20 years ago when it was just a dusty track. This is the road that you went on. This is almost the exact same route that you and Dad took to Coram and Mekelle.
It is, absolutely. There'd been a long build-up to the 1984-1985 famine, and Mo and I had come up to report it, and the first time we came through this area was in early 1983, so a full 18 months before the famine reached its disastrous peak.
As we near Tigray, Mike looks for those early giveaway signs of famine. We stop to let a funeral party pass. But this is not the result of famine. The cycle of life has simply run its natural course. By the roadside are reminders of the ruinous civil war that accelerated the famine. Conflict was raging up here in 1984. Food for the starving had to run the gauntlet of warring armies.
A very important part of all this as well was that the leader at that time, Colonel Mengistu Haile Mariam, he clearly did not want the message going out that this country could not feed its people, it could not cope, that there was another famine welling up again.
Mike, did Dad's contacts make a lot of difference in getting into this area?
They played a big part, and as you say, he had such a long history of working, filming in this country, that of course helped hugely.
Is there plentiful water? Are the oxen emaciated, the peasants strong enough to work? So far, what we have seen suggests that all is well in the countryside. At Walja, it is market day.
Mike, we're here in Walja. It's about 50, 60 kilometers away from the real epicenter of the famine in Coram. But you're looking around here, there's fresh fruit and vegetable. It's all very green. Is this a deceptive?
I think things can be very deceptive indeed, you're right. And in fact, this whole area is the one where famine, when it's happened in Ethiopia, has so often begun. And today, I mean, this market looks as if it's a very thriving community. I think the big problem is, and again, as you say, these sort of scenes don't necessarily give it away, that the underlying destitution of people in an area like this is very great. And there'll be lots of people who can't afford to come here and buy, or at least not to buy very much. So the real challenge in Ethiopia, of course, is to address that poverty that lies behind all this.
Because, you know, they're trying to make the appeal again about a large number of people needing food aid this year. If they bring journalists here, they're not going to get the kind of impression that, you know, nobody wants to see starving children per se, but that is what the international community needs to see in order to give aid.
You're absolutely right. I mean, that's the dilemma, isn't it? In a way, I mean, particularly because of the starkest scenes back of 1984 and 1985, they set a whole benchmark for what we've come to expect of famine and hunger.
It's not just the roads that have dramatically improved. A novelty for Mike Wooldridge and me is the sight of a general election in progress. Out here in the countryside, it looks peaceful and untainted by fraud. But we hear later that in the capital there have been clashes and loss of life.
It's not true to say that in October 1984 the famine exploded on the world. The build-up to it had been reported. The world knew about it, or certainly should have known about it. But critically, what the world hadn't had, as the famine was becoming catastrophically worse, was the visual evidence.
That damning visual evidence was obtained in this place, Coram. After a blitz on the Ethiopian bureaucracy that only Dad could mount, he and BBC correspondent Mike Berg got to Coram and began to shoot. Alongside was Mike Wooldridge, reporting for Sound Radio.
Like 20 years ago, this is the place.
It is indeed, and that morning, what the dawn revealed to Mo, revealed to us, was a scene. It was almost impossible to believe that this was happening in the late 20th century. These houses alongside us here now, they've been built for the poor, but then this was just an open plain, absolutely filled, as far as the eye could see, with Destitute people, the kind of people living in these houses today, absolutely destitute people who'd come here over the months. Failed harvest had left them with absolutely nothing. They'd thrown themselves on the mercy of this place, and they were now dying here. And we found that weekend they were dying here at a rate of up to 100 every single day. Just as far as the eye could see, there were people. There were tens of thousands of them here by that time. There were just a few thousand who'd managed to get some protection against the bitter cold at that time of year in corrugated iron shelters that were down there at that time. They've been pulled down since. Most people simply had to try to exist out here in the open. Now, we can see this morning people swathed in calico to keep themselves warm, and this time of year was so much colder, and people only had the thinnest of calico shawls, of calico dresses, and some of the children in particular really had nothing on at all. What they'd done to try and give themselves some sort of protection against this was to lie in any kind of hollow they could find, any sort of dip in the ground, but it really offered very little protection at all. And of course the whole point was that these are people who by then were so hungry. There'd been very little food getting through to here anyway, certainly not for the numbers that had then descended on the town.
Claire, you've told us how, on the basis of which you select people for here, but I mean, just from a personal point of view, how do you feel about having to turn so many people away?
I feel terrible because it's sending them to a certain death. It's terrible. I can take just what we can.
How badly are some of the people who you do send away?
They will die within the night, maybe even. In fact, they might be even too bad for us to take. That's sometimes why we won't take them. If they're too bad, we know they're going to die. We send them to the hospital because there's nothing we can do. Food won't even help.
But making that decision day after day, does that do anything too?
Yes, of course it does. What do you expect? Yes, of course it does. It breaks my heart, but at least I can see some of the ones that I am helping here, and that helps when you do see the ones that survive.
Mike, there have been many famines before 1984. Why did those pictures make such an impact? Did my dad do anything differently that day?
Well, number one, I think it was the sheer scale of it. Since the earlier famine here 10 years before, we hadn't had anything on this scale. But I think that as I watched him at work that day, one of the things that I think he did so effectively was to convey not just what was happening to people right here, how they were trying to exist, but also what was happening to them inside. It wasn't always easy because people were quite subdued. Now that might sound surprising living in such appalling conditions, but there was almost a silence around here. There wasn't much sound. There were, when somebody had died, any relatives around them would certainly be sobbing, but to a large extent this was a quiet place. And I think that what Mo captured very effectively was it was almost a sort of dignity that people had. I think Mo, through his camera, through his lens, did a great deal, and particularly through focusing on their expressions in their eyes, showing us immensely graphic images of the haunting look in people's eyes. Perhaps one of the most powerful images of all was the mother and child lying together down there, the bodies of a mother and child which had been placed together under calico, where they laid out all of the bodies just down below the slope there every morning. That is certainly one of the most memorable images of all, I think, of this famine, so powerful.
I felt him change after that story. I'd never seen him cry before. He did cry in the edit suite that day that the pictures came back. When they were cutting it before they took it to London, he did cry. Something which for him was a great sign of weakness to be seen to be crying. But they did it, him and Mike, I think, did it with complete, I don't know the word, I mean complete, they had no shame about doing it. It was just something that they had to do.
Well, I mean, none of us will really cover a story of quite that kind again. I mean, I think he was the old Mo for sure. You know, he was still as competitive as ever. He wanted to still
Scoop the world.
Scoop the world of whatever he did. But he was a new Mo as well.